and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 15th episode in our ongoing series. Our November 2023 episode features an interview with author, public speaker, and strategy management consultant Marcy Axelrod. The interview, conducted by IGS President Lance Strate, focuses on her new book entitled How We Choose to Show Up, her work as a business consultant, and the importance of speech, relationships, and personal presence. Let's listen in to their conversation.
Well, welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. And this is Lance Strate here. I'm really happy to have with us author, public speaker, and consultant Marcy Axelrod. We'll be talking about her new book, which will be coming out shortly. Marcy, welcome to our podcast.
Lance, thank you so much. I feel very privileged to be here among such good company of your previous podcast speakers.
Well, it's good to have you. And of course, it was great to have you last month as a participant at our symposium on non-Aristotelian perspectives, ecological approaches, and the Anthropocene, which followed the 71st annual Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture. And your book that's going to be coming out shortly is called How We Choose to Show Up. You also are a consultant. And what exactly do you do as a consultant?
So I do your classic strategy management consulting as well as effectiveness management consulting, going back to 1999. After I left Wall Street, I joined KPMG Consulting in Silicon Valley and was one of the leaders of their high-tech strategy practice, which was such an amazing time because, this is when the dot-com leaders of today were just being born, the Yahoos and Googles and eBays and all of that. So it was a very, very exciting time. I got to work with a number of them. And now, 20 plus years later, I'm still doing a lot of the same quality work.
And you said strategy management consultant. What is that?
So the classic example that I give is when HP came to me and said, Marcy, put together a team and help us beat IBM in every industry group and on every continent. So I had a team of 5 people in Asia, 5 people in Europe, 5 people in America, and we also covered, Middle East and Africa. And we then started with customer research, understand what are people actually trying to achieve with the products and services that HP sells, which, by the way, is extremely vast, and understand the markets and the competition. And then from there, put together how it is that HP can meet the needs of what these people are trying to achieve better than their competitor. That was way back then, probably 2001. Other questions I answer are just, Marcy, how can we be more efficient and effective? Or, Marcy, we grew really fast and we're really successful, but now none of the role descriptions actually describe what people do. And we're starting to have a significant number of quality issues and culture issues because of that success. So that's something else I work on.
So it's helping organizations to function better overall.
Yes. But, what I realized along the way, right, doing surveys of, tens of thousands of people around the world at a given time, over and over and over, Lance, is that what leads people to be effective is extremely consistent. And what gets in our way, which are the human aspects of all of it, are also extremely consistent. And that's what led me to write my first book, which has now led to my second book.
And your first book, can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. My first book is called On Your Game. It's about how people achieve and what gets in our way. That, within a few months of being out, actually won 2 awards, which simply told me that I can write, but also explained that people think the ideas have legs and need to be heard. So I changed the phrasing around it and did very specific research around showing up. Right? What does it mean to show up? How do people show up? And to what degree is it actually a conscious choice? And do we like the results? So I changed it from the word achieve to showing up. And oh my goodness, out of the blue, now I'm on TV every other Saturday. I'm being asked to be on podcasts. So it seems like no one had yet put a defendable, somewhat comprehensive framework around what it means to show up, and that there's value in understanding what it means.
Now, that's your new book about showing up.
Exactly. And it comes right on the heels of the previous one. People in the medical field and the psychological field have been some of the people raising their hands the highest. Right now, actually, I'm scoping a piece of work with a gentleman who owns and runs some of the largest craniofacial surgery practices at Mount Sinai. And he said, Marcy, the way the physician team shows up to themselves, to their work, to their patients, to the staff, the way my offices show up, there's, dozens of offices, the way the Mount Sinai system shows up within all of this. He said, Marcy, what you explained needs to be understood by each one of these constituent groups, such that we can all bring the humanness that's inherent within us to each of these. And then he gave specific examples of what I would call from my kind of Six Sigma practice effectiveness work. These are really potential points of failure. And the failure is extremely deeply felt. It's felt in the people who can't sleep, in the people who have issues that are diagnosed as cardiac issues when really there's something related to other root causes. And the more you understand and help the system to show up effectively, each piece of the process is benefited.
Well, before we get more into that, then, how did you start with all of this? And maybe going back to your education, and how did you just get started in looking at questions of this sort?
Lance, thank you. I really appreciate that. And people have told me that hearing the root of this really rings. It's something that they can resonate with. So I have very distinct beginnings. I started to stutter when I was 6, and I literally lost the ability to speak for decades. So I started to observe, and there was a lot of emotion there. So I'm 8 years old, and I'm on the blacktop behind my elementary school. And I noticed that in the line to play Foursquare, where like there's someone in each box and kind of the person in the A square hits the ball. And in that line, there were people who were afraid that they'd get slammed out. They were scared. And just by showing up scared, the person in the A square felt empowered and was a bully and slammed them out. And I thought, well, there's someone who's showing up as a bully and there's someone showing up as a scaredy cat, and they both have a choice of how they're showing up to each other and to the situation. And to everyone who's watching, to society, to everybody. And yet they're not choosing. And here I am unable to choose. I knew how I wanted to show up, but I was unable to. And that stuck with me. The second story, my mother's a pediatrician, and her beeper would go off in the middle of the night, and I was on driveway duty. And there I am, I'm 12 years old, and I had a math test that I cared about. And at 2 a.m., the beeper went off. And my mother popped into my room, and all she had to say is, Marcy, I have to go in. And what that meant is I jumped out of bed and I shoveled that snow like my life depended on it. All the while with the faces of the parents of, the potentially dying baby in my mind. And the message I took away from that is I matter. We all matter. Because everyone shoveling the snow, letting my mother get to the ER to save that baby, which by the way, she did. Everyone mattered. Everyone in the hospital, everyone along the way, all the friends who helped that family get through that. The third quick anecdote, when I was 12, my parents signed me up for this 2-month stint at a rehabilitation hospital where I was supposedly going to learn how to speak. And I noticed elders who had a lifetime of wisdom, and they had a plan that they were pursuing with experts at this hospital. They were learning to sit and to stand and to hold a cup and to feed themselves. And I looked at that and I saw people with a lifetime of wisdom who know how they want to show up, even when aided by skilled, educated, experienced experts. Sometimes they were still unable to show up as they chose. And I said, where's the roadmap? Why is this so hard? And that's when I concluded there needs to be some kind of model or framework for what it means to show up. and what the levels are and how we get there. So that is why I do what I do. And all of those experiences were, roughly between the ages of 8 and 12. And that is, and my passion for this has been extremely clear. And I basically become a social scientist. I call myself a practical behavioral scientist. And that's the answer to your question of why I do what I do.
That's quite fascinating. And it brings to mind the fact that one of the early kind of the pioneering general semantics scholars, Wendell Johnson, was a speech pathologist whose particular focus was on stuttering. In fact, he believed, and there was some controversy over that, because he was questioning to what extent stuttering was in fact a problem, and to what extent it was created by the label imposed on people that the idea of feeding back into yourself, so that being concerned about stuttering makes you stutter and creates a kind of feedback loop that makes the problem that much worse. That was a time also, that goes back to the 40s, but even in my time when I was an undergraduate, communication departments, which I came out of, were at that time included speech and speech pathology quite often, so that even though they were very different endeavors and didn't mix a lot, there was a kind of the borderline was in learning proper speech and pronunciation and that sort of thing. I'll add on a personal note that I did go to speech in elementary school myself, although it was a very minor kind of issue where my parents, being European immigrants, did not know how to make the TH sound. And I didn't learn that as a child. And so they sent me to speech to teach me, they would go za instead of the. And so they sent me to speech to correct that, which, I was able to do without too much trouble. It's just fascinating to hear you bring that up in regards to speech, which of course is the essence of language. Language is speech.
Yes, language is speech. And our challenge, there's an important lesson to kind of untether from this. You who worked on a speech impediment, as did I, are both now in roles in life that require clear speech. So those seminal experiences of life literally defined and created our choices going forward. They created this moment, Lance.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about how much it affected me going forward. I do know that at the same time, or like I guess maybe a year or two after that, in elementary school, they used to have, perhaps they still do, these scholastic book fairs. And I picked up a book that was just about language. Just interested me, and it was this this sort of like the talking about what language is and its history, the history of English language. So my interest was piqued fairly early on. Of course, coming from a multilingual household, we weren't encouraged to, in our generation, we were, when you were a child of immigrants, you were not encouraged to learn these other languages. You were supposed to be an American and just speak English, but the household and the whole neighborhood was multilingual. So it was kind of in the air, literally.
Right. I very much believe that we are not just defined by these early experiences, but we are designed by everyone and everything around us, right? Even our definition of self is contextual, right? We are not from the inside out only. We are, I think, a majority defined from the outside in. There's a new book about this called Selfless by Lois Lowry, a business school professor at Stanford, who talks about this. And before I had found his book, I very much wrote about this and the definition of self and society, which of course combine and come together through the moments of our life, which I call our situations, right? Those are the three roles in which we show up: selves, members of situations, and members of something larger that I call society, but it's also being a member of nature, of spirituality, of everything that's larger than ourself or our momentary situation.
Mm-hmm. And that's where Korzybski referred to the organism as a whole in its environment, with each word connected by a hyphen to indicate that it is one whole concept.
Yes. And I know you and Nora Bateson just a few weeks ago spoke about making up words. So I've trademarked a word that I believe really needs to be very prominent in our lexicon, which is all-telligence, and a derivation of that is all-dividual. We are not individuals. We are not like all the skills and knowledge and joy and health that we need. It doesn't just come from inside. It comes from what's outside of us. It comes from nature. It comes from the sunshine. It comes from the trees. It comes from the systems in which we interact that influence us and that we then co-create with them, with everything, right? Nora was speaking about what is food? What is food, right?
Yeah.
Is it actually what you put in your mouth? Well, what about the rain that fertilized the crops? What about the soil? What about whether the plot of land or the crop was grown at one point was potentially going to be bought and mowed down and it become condominiums to line someone's pocket or that of a corporation that then had shareholders to, make money for it, right? So anyway, the term all-dividual is something that expresses this we concept that Dr. Dan Siegel talks about, that we aren't just a me, we are a we. We are, but I go further. We are really in everything, because I've included nature in this. I've included the flows and the growth processes of our moments across our lives. So next time we think about the skills and knowledge that we need and, to what we need to achieve, the intelligence of that system is broader. And to whatever extent it's useful to use the phrase all intelligence, or to think of ourselves more as an all-dividual than an individual, I believe that it would significantly contribute to our health, it would get rid of stress. It cuts through, racism and anti-Semitism and sexism and all the categories of the genders that we shouldn't be put in these boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Something that Ian McGilchrist talks about, right? About how the left hemisphere of the brain categorizes, right? It pulls us out of the territory, off the terroir, off the earth, and it puts us into this map. So now we're in this map, and now everything is black or white, and it's good or bad, and it's either high, medium, or low, and it's this version of data. Either the person was a visitor or they were a contributor, right? All the categories that our social postings are put into eyeballs on a page, and all of that, it loses the context, it loses the humanness. And this is really the underlying purpose of showing up, is to return us to our humanness so that we can restore our health and happiness.
And this does have a connection to speech, going back to that, because it's really not highlighted in Ian McGilchrist, who you bring up, but from a media ecology point of view, what pushes the left hemisphere all the way up and what makes Western culture what it is literacy. And, that shifts us away from the oral world and the spoken word into this visual, written and printed typographic kind of world. And that's where the left hemisphere comes in. There are all kinds of interesting connections that come in with that. Is the tendency also to break things apart, which is a great tool, but when we go too far with it and we get stuck in just breaking things apart, looking at the pieces and not seeing how they interconnect, and looking at ourselves as individuals rather than as part of a community, a collective, and a network. So this fits in very nicely. And you mentioned the self, which, of course, think about symbolic interaction. George Herbert Mead in the early 20th century and Irving Goffman in the 50s, the presentation of self in everyday life, and the idea that the self is a construct and a performance that we put on, which I think is very much related to your idea of showing up.
Right. I mean, maybe this is a reasonable time to just express the concept of what showing up is. Would you like me to do that?
I think so, yes.
And I can read this quote from the opening of my book, actually.
Great.
It's from a gentleman who was the head of HR at Nestle Gerber for a number of years. And the quote is, I don't think anybody thinks about how they're showing up. When I have something to put in front of the board of directors, do I think about it? Of course. On a day-to-day basis, no. Who does? And then directly across from that, so there's this visual shifting from left to right. The opening sentences of the book. This book is about a choice we all have, but don't often make. It's a choice so valuable our lives and legacies depend on it. What am I describing? How we choose to show up, or whether we're choosing at all. Very simply put, 3 levels, right? All of life is infused with levels of quality, whether we talk about them or not. 1, 2, 3. Level 1, being barely there. You're either totally checked out, you're ill, there's something that's a very significant stressor, and you're really not engaging with the moments beyond surviving. Level 2, which is what my research across 20 years shows, 80% of us do 80% of the time, and I call this just showing up. This is when you're just moving from one thing to the next, and you're kind of in get it done mode, right? And you're like flitting about, get this and that and this and that. Multitasking definitely falls in this realm. But even when you're only doing one thing, if you're kind of moving fast just to get stuff done, that is just showing up. It's also the performance mode that you spoke about. Anytime you're feeling a level of, I don't belong here, I'm an imposter, everyone's better than me, everyone's smarter, any version of fear that's driving our presence, that is just showing up. And then I put the word truly on level 3. It really doesn't need it, but showing up with the depth of presence, where kind of, if you think about yourself being barefoot in like rich soil, and you're kind of squishing your heels in, and you're feeling that there's a texture to it, there's a wetness to it, there's a richness to it. You're really there. This is when you're probably looking someone in the eye silently, and your whole body is intuiting what's going on with that other that human being, right? There's a connectedness there where you're infusing each other, and there's actually a resonance going on in your brains. This is truly showing up. When it's not with another person, it can be with a piece of work that you're thinking about, even if it's focused on data or a spreadsheet. You're in the flow where your thoughts are connecting, right? There's a level of inventiveness. It's an expansiveness. This is a right hemispheric experience. This is how we attend to the world with our right hemisphere. We can switch back to our left, get into some version of get it done mode, but then we recontextualize that in the broader sphere, going back to our right. This is truly showing up when we have the ability to go back and forth. And people feel that we're truly there's a withness, right? There's a feeling felt that we experience when other people are truly showing up with, and I say with, to, and for us. Mm-hmm. Instead of being to something, we're also with and for them. So anyway, simply put, showing up is 3 levels. It's intuitive, like without all my words, you can, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Right. But it's important to be able to put it to words and help people to think about it. Some connections come to mind. Being There, the novel by Jerzy Kosinski, Martin Buber's I and You, which is also very influential for Walter Ong, who really focused on orality and literacy and the idea of presence.
Mhm.
coming out of that, of being there again, which I guess it also kind of raises the question of, I mean, what are the kind of barriers to being there, to showing up? What keeps people from doing that?
Yes. So I talk about this in my book. I go in two different ways. Right here, I'll just speak about what's top of mind, Lance. So any version of stressor that is alerting our nervous system puts us into a just showing up mode. There's a lot of research that shows that we perceive the world and others as threats when objectively there's no threat that's going on. But when we feel a sense of threat from something maybe that happened last week, or from something that we're anticipating, so we then, the world shows up to us as a threatening place. We then interact with a lack of trust. People perceive it from us in a fraction of a second at a subconscious level, and then they back up and protect themselves. And then both of you are just showing up to each other and to the content of the situation. And it's all because we have not consciously chosen to level 3 truly show up, right, with an intelligent choice, right? We haven't reset our nervous system knowing that we're concerned or triggered or scared. So we then create that, and then it perpetuates 3 levels deep through society. I'm happy to talk about all the statistics behind this, but for right now, I'll just park it with, if there's anything that's stressing us, that is really the number one thing. Mm-hmm. It's imbued in our culture. So what our news organizations choose to speak to us about, the fact that even something like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times choose to put these just immensely emotionally rich, kind of heart-jerking images on the front of tragedy and war going on the planet. And just the things that we're watching these days are significantly imbued with a depth of emotion, and it's not typically one that's beautiful. It's one that's horrifying. It's violent, because they're selling attention. There are many other things. Epigenetics have largely proven that we are living with transgenerational trauma from lives past. Rachel Yehuda, I believe, is the one who defined the term PTSD, right, post-traumatic stress disorder, in the 90s. And she did the seminal work that showed that the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have significantly lower what's called, I believe, all-form morbidity. I mean, basically, they're just much more likely to have all sorts of diseases and poor health outcomes that no one wants to talk about. But it isn't just true for Holocaust families. It's true for anyone who's ever had elders. I mean, everyone from slaves to victims of war. So this is in us. We're stirring it up like never before with our culture. My 13-year-old's favorite band is called the Suicide Boys. And it turns out that she wanted a new pair of Crocs because she had worn through her Crocs. And I said, great, let's choose a pair. And she said, Mom, these are the ones that I want. And they're Suicide Boys Crocs. And I said, so I'd love to just buy you another pair of the ones that you have now. It's a lovely blue. And she said, no, Mom, I'm not going to wear anything other than these. And I said, well, I tell you what, take a few days and think about it, because I'm not going to buy you those. There's an epidemic of teen suicide. And, you've already refused to go to school, and you've done a number of things that would horrify any parent. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to reinforce this suicide in our daily lives. And I can't see you walking around in those. And, so now she doesn't, have shoes other than these old ruined ones that are probably going to cause her to twist her ankle. And this is what we're living with. And it goes on and on and on. So now I'm triggered. And the moment I see her, because now we have this thing where I can't even buy my child the pair of shoes that she's choosing to wear, and on and on. So I'm going to stop there, but it's in our culture. It's in our genetics. It's reinforced everywhere. And we're all walking around with a level of stress that I think no one is going to deny. And so in my speeches, I simply ask, raise your hand if in the last 5 days you've felt any kind of joie de vivre, that you felt inventive, you felt creative. There's been a spring in your step. There's been any version of what you could even minimally call joy. And the number of people who raise their hands is just de minimis. And yet, when I say raise your hand when you felt a level of stress that's a 7 or above in the last 5 days, and the hands shoot up. And I say, so is this kind of more than you felt, let's say, 5 years ago? And there's no denying. So this is where we are. We're just showing up. And what people say is, Marcy, you've given me a lexicon to discuss this. And I've translated it into business terms because, of course, I'm a strategy management consultant. So now the HR team has given their team leads a way to kind of level set when they talk about how they want people to engage with customers and with each other. They say, look, I know we're all doing more just showing up than we used to. Here's what we're doing to help you just show up to, this engagement with this really, really important client.
Well, you bring up the trauma point, and I remember, because my parents were Holocaust survivors, so I remember just reading about that, and there was some level of comfort as a teenager, realizing that that was a common experience with others, and more recently thinking about that being passed on to the next generation and to my own kids is disturbing, to say the least. But how do you counter that? I mean, you're saying choose to show up. It sort of sounds along the lines of the will to find meaning in your life. And, because we're really going beyond business here, but, I just can't help but wonder, what your thoughts are about just finding that in life in general.
Right. So how do we actually bring to life a choice in how we're showing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you a 2-part answer. I'm going to try to be as clear as possible. The first is to understand what the 3 components are of showing up. And then the second is a series of steps of enable us to actually enact the awareness and the choice. And it's actually the same thing that Ian McGilchrist talks about, and the same thing that anybody who's trying to help us be mindful and ready talks about. But I have very specific things. So the first is the model of how we show up. Bottom line, we are not just selves. We're in 3 roles at all times. Keep this in mind. We are ourselves. We are members of something larger like society, impacting everyone at all times. And we do this through the moments of our lives called situations. So we're selves within situations and members of society. There's a skill for each one. I try to make it as simple as I can. Grounding in ourselves. The book describes exactly what that means. Readiness for our situations. That's a big deal, because what is a situation? It's actually an improvisational dance that we co-create. And then what is society? That's also a big deal. And it is the everything that's outside of ourselves. Okay. So that's the first part of the answer. Know what it means to know what showing up really means. What is the model? Nature designed the model, not Marcy Axelrod. Nature designed this. All I did is I put a framework around it that's understandable and communicable. It has always been there, and it's irrefutable because everything shows up. You can apply that model to nature. You can apply it to a tree. You can apply it to this cup of water, everything, to our government, to your vote, to how you relate to your weight and your food choices. Everything shows up. Okay. The second part of the answer, how do we bring choice? So the first thing is that you have an awareness that you're showing up at every moment. I actually use the word attune, not aware, because awareness kind of brings you to the gate, but it doesn't step you in. I want to step you in. So I use attune, because when you attune, your body state changes. You're shifting from your left hemisphere into your right, because the question, how am I choosing to show up? All of a sudden, it brings your perspective way up, and you're seeing a breadth. You're seeing yourself within context, and you go whoosh. You've expanded your perspective, and you've shifted from your left brain get it done mode into your right hemisphere, which is where you see the periphery. You sense the more, the newness. So you bring awareness by asking yourself the question, how am I choosing to show up? And what that does is it changes how you attend to the world. And from noticing something new, you become curious and your nervous system resets. So this is what you've done now is number one, you've brought in a tuning or an awareness, use whichever word works for you. Now you can be curious and ask questions. What's really going on here? And you can release that assumption of I know, because we don't know anything. We really don't. And the more you know, the more you recognize how little you know. So ask questions around what's really going on here. Visualize some of what may be going on, what the possibilities are. From there's something really meaningful that I recommend. As you let go of the judgment, I very much recommend, if you're with like another person, look them in the eyes silently and just be with others, because it is incredibly rewarding. And what is rewarded, we naturally start to do more of. So be with others and live in your questions. So that is what I recommend. From like one thing leads to the next and the next and the next, and you'll start to show up differently and you'll be rewarded by it. I'm told all the time, Marcy, the moment I ask that question, everything changes. I do my work differently. I relate differently, and then people interact with me differently.
Great advice. Now, since we've been talking also about your consulting, and I know you have many great stories that come from that, could you perhaps relate one of them that illustrates how this applies beyond, shouldn't say beyond, but apart from this very deep personal questions, but to the more pragmatic area of business and how that works for you?
Absolutely. I'll give a really quick example that everyone can relate to: engagement rings. So I was asked by one of the largest global, privately held jewelers on the planet, Marcy, how do we grow our business? What we figured out through a lot of survey work, asking the right questions about how people are showing up to the various questions related to engagement. And then we asked them to do a forced ranking of what was most important to them and what was least satisfied by the market. We identified where the real opportunity existed between what was most important to people and what was being not well satisfied by the market. And this client's business grew 30% in about 6 months, but I'll tell you what specifically did it. The question that showed up as most important, or what was rated most important, is the statement, I knew I was ready to get engaged. People were showing up to it with massive uncertainty. So it was an unmet and unsatisfied need that was also showing up at a subconscious level. So it was not articulated. And this is why Tiffany couldn't meet this need, and all the big providers of diamond rings couldn't. You might ask, well, how does a company step into that, right? How do they show up to that insight of people needed to understand that they were ready to get engaged? So what this company did is they engaged a bunch of experts to write a bunch of articles. How do you know, like, the 3 things that tell you that you're ready to get engaged? the way you'll feel the moment you know you're ready to pop the question, right? All of these things. And it wasn't branded. So people clicked on the articles that were out there, received the value of the insight. And at the very bottom was a link sponsored by, and they clicked through, and there was a direct and measurable link from reading the article to the company's website and to buying the ring. And they carried that question through the entire buyer's journey of going through from the article to designing the ring. And there was a wizard that asked you about the person you were going to propose to. Characterize the person. Is the person more like this or like this? Do they like this or this? Would they choose this movie or that? These clothes or that? This color or that? This adventure or that? And from there, they very much helped you to reinforce your knowledge that your readiness was there, which is really the same question as, are you ready to push the buy button? Because the average ring these days is $6,000. So that is how understanding showing up related to growing a multi-billion-dollar business 30% in 6 months.
Fascinating.
And I'd be happy to walk you through the slides. I've got, because we presented to the board of directors a number of times. So if people want to see the deliverable, I can, I genericize it and walk through a few slides with you. And by the way, I beat McKinsey in winning that word. It was fun.
Well, that's really great. Yeah, of course, we're acoustic only, so we'll have to make do with the storytelling, but it is a great story and a great illustration of what you're talking about. Speaking about the book, then I would guess that story is probably in the book.
No, actually, that story is not in the book. No, it isn't. Maybe I should write a newsletter about it.
Well, is there something from the book that you would care to share, with us?
Let's see. Just a few quotes.
Okay.
If it's okay. Yeah. So,
sure, please.
Something that's really important. Showing up unites us as humans, right? It transcends race, ethnicity, education, abilities, social strata, gender identity, all these categories that are too often used to divide us. So that is one quote. I really want people to recognize that. What it does is it returns us to our humanness so that you can see people for their aspirations, not the limits of their behavior in the moment, right? All of our just showing up behavior, which is what's manifest. Another quote, showing up is a big idea. It asserts that there's a natural model for how humans are designed to thrive, and that we choose our behavior each moment, making us responsible for our impacts on each other and the world. So let's see. Do you think, Lance, people might be interested in a few sentences of defining self? Or
by all means, yeah, please.
Okay. Oh, before that, I just have one more quick quote that people tell me really stands out. Showing up isn't a peripheral feature of our operating system. It's our defining characteristic. So let us fortify and profit from it. All right, I'm getting to, yeah.
Yeah, I really like the way that this connects to new media and understanding ourselves as reflected in our own extensions, our own inventions.
Yes, exactly. So so after I read a few sentences, please do relate it back to all the great thinkers that are the foundation of general semantics. So in discussing self, there are three native roles in which we show up, right? Self is one. Now, we show up between two extremes of self. One is mainly separate, closed, and self-serving. Its world is to be utilized for gain. The other self is interwoven, actively contributing to and flowing within our relational world. It senses the collective intimacy in which we exist. So you might recognize, right? One is left hemisphere focused, right? The small s self, and what I call this big S self is right hemisphere focused. The left left brain small self. This is very much this I, me, mine concept. It's part of our default mode, and it has our mirrors facing ourselves. So we end up in this echo chamber of fear and denial and concern that really limits our ability to be free and to be authentic and to fulfill our true selves. So anyway, those are a few quotes about self. When we practice showing up, the me and the you merge, and our we becomes much, much larger. And that is when people feel felt by us, and they open opportunities for us, and they are comforted by us, right? And this is when we truly start to move.
I think, when you talk about this, and a lot of what general semantics is concerned with is getting as accurate a understanding of our external environment, of our reality, as is humanly possible, knowing that it's always going to be imperfect, limited, and subject to error. And it seems like showing up, and as you're talking about it, is very much about being in that reality and being in touch with our surroundings.
Yes, and something that we can do at the systems level. I realize that this has very much been about the individual as opposed to the all individual, which I think is a more expansive, abundant way to live that will make us healthier and happier, not just as individuals, but also as a society. Adding the system lens to what you just said, Lance, something that we can do is to visibly value and reward a level of thoughtfulness, a level of reflecting, of not rushing to judgment, and of using our language more expansively to reconnect us as that kind of joint being, right? The drop of water that is at once in the ocean as a separate identifiable thing, but also of the ocean, right? And that recognizing that in an instant, there may be a collection of us that as a tribe are a wave, and the wave is definable. But then the wave dissipates. It was never separate from the ocean. Even after it's gone, it still does exist in some form. It is just diffused within a society, a community, a family, whatever the instance is of kind of group that you want to use. But the more that we cast our economic and our emotional and verbal votes for being more than just a small self, right? Being this intergenerational kind of interbeing, this moi, if you will, the more society will absorb it.
And I think this is very consistent with the general semantics concept of multi-valued orientation, or which is to say, it's not either or, but both and. It's not either you're an individual or you're not an individual. We are both individuals and also more than individuals. We're also part of a tribe and part of a community at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Right. And the way that we feel that is by pausing, to be more circumspect.
Yeah. And we call it this a semantic pause.
Exactly. So I'm giving you the question that is the pause. How are we choosing to show up? And you'll see, once you have this idea in mind, everyone you see, you'll start to recognize how people are showing up. And then instead of judging them, you can relate with grace and with consideration. They get to show up with who they are in this moment right now. just as we do.
Well, I think this book is going to be very valuable. So can you tell us a little bit about when it'll be available and how we can learn more about it?
Definitely. Well, part one is right up there on the website, downloadable for free. Just click on the link. Choosetoshow.up.com is the website. Choosetoshow.up.com.
Choose to show up, one word.
Yes, Choosetoshow.up.com.
Okay.
Is the website. You can download part one. You can also go to contact, and I can make you aware when it's when the link is available for pre-order, which I think should be any day now. However, I've been just sending out digital copies because, I'm not really about selling the book. I'm about helping the world be happier and healthier. So anyone who's interested, just contact me and I'd be very happy to send you a digital copy of the full book.
Okay. And how would they contact you?
Oh, right through the website. There's a contact button.
Okay. So choosetoshow.up.com. You can download part one and contact Marcy Axelrod to get more information and get updates about your work and the rest of the book. Find out how it turns out in the end.
Yes, exactly. How it turns out. The way it turns out is just what people have told me is helpful to help them choose how they're showing up. Like that's what I put at the back of the book.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This has been really a wonderful conversation, and it was very good to learn more about your work and about you yourself.
Lance, thank you so much. It is really such an honor to be part of the community that is, the General Semantics Society.
Well, we look forward to seeing and hearing more of you in the future. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to our November 2023 episode of Semantic Reactions, featuring an interview with Marcy Axelrod. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity, and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's General Semantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 15th episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.